Part 1, Theoretical Context. In Module 1, we have learned that the biomatrix is organized like a fisherman's net. A net consists of strings or threads and knots. Accordingly, we can distinguish string-like activity systems, knot-like entity systems, and net-like web systems. Examples of string-like activity systems are projects, functions, business processes in an organization, and so on. Examples of knot-like entity systems are an organism, an organization, a society, a planet, a cell, an atom, and so on. Examples of net-like web systems are ecological systems, social institutions, industries, and they're typically characterized by the interaction of different types of entity systems. The analogy of the knot for an entity system gives us some very important insights. The first insight is that we can take two different strings, knot them together in different ways, and each knot will have different properties. For example, we can make a granny knot, which is a very strong knot, not easy to undo, so we use it for sewing. Or we can make a reef knot, which is a very strong knot, but easy to undo. Or a Chinese knot, which is very beautiful, but not very strong, and if one pulls on one end, the whole knot dissolves. The importance is that the threads are always the same. It is their interfacing, their interaction, which is different. In other words, the substance is not determining the quality of the knot. It is the pattern of organization that determines what the quality of the knot is going to be. So different knots are the result of different ethos, different information, even if the threads are the same. What is the relevance of this? The relevance of this is that the activity systems of an entity system can be very efficient in themselves, but if they are interfaced, interknotted in a not efficient way, then we will have outcomes at the level of the entity system which are not efficient. So, for example, an organizational structure, the silo structure of the industrial age, was a structure where there was very little communication between the different activity systems. By comparison, if we are having a matrix structure where the activity systems are interfacing matrix-like, there will be a lot of cross-flow of information, innovation, creativity, learning, etc. So the property or quality of the organization with a matrix structure will be completely different than the property or quality of an organization that has the traditional organizational hierarchy. If you're looking closer at how the knot-like entity system is organized, then we see that it has a threefold organization. Analogous to the knot, some threads go out, some threads wind around itself, and some threads point inward. So we have outward directed activity systems, inward directed activity systems, and self-directed activity systems. In a person, for example, outward directed activity systems refer to those activities that we are doing for the outer environment, our family, society, work life, etc. Our inward directed activity systems are aimed at the inner environment, the cellular environment, exercising, eating, rest, sleep, stress management. And then there are the self-directed activity systems, my activities directed at myself, memorizing, thinking, developing, learning, identifying, and so on. We can look at the biomatrix from different perspectives. One of them being the activity system perspective, or the string perspective. If we are zooming into an activity system, it actually becomes a web of interacting activity and entity systems. For example, the education system of a society is an activity system. If we are zooming into it, we are seeing different entity systems like education departments, schools, universities, persons, faculties, etc. And a lot of activities interacting between them, in other words, activity systems. Likewise, if we are zooming into a function in an organization, say the marketing function, we will see maybe different marketing units, subunits, and individuals interacting with each other with various activities. We can also look at the entity perspective of the biometrics, and if we zoom into an entity system, then we will see a web of interacting activity and entity systems. So for example, if we are zooming into a society, we will see different organizations, different institutions, different persons, and they are interacting with each other through a variety of activity systems. Likewise, if we zoom into an organization, we will see a web of functions and business activities, and we will see business units, different departments, and different individual persons interacting with each other. Why is this important? Is because when we look at activity systems, as we do in this module, we will also identify that it is actually a web that includes entity systems and other activity systems, sub-activity systems, and that an activity system is part of a larger activity system, and there are stakeholders who are entity systems that are concerned with our activity system. We can also look at the subwebs of the biometrics, the naturosphere, psychosociosphere, and technosphere. The naturosphere includes ecological, physiological, biological, physical systems. Psychosociosphere includes psychological thinking, feeling, and so on, as well as cultural, economic, and political systems. And the technosphere is concerned with technological systems and processes. These different spheres and the system within these spheres interrelate with each other. The systems co-produce each other, and the result is that each system of any of the spheres reflects the characteristics of the systems of the three spheres, making a system multidimensional. So the project you're working with will have a natural dimension, maybe a health dimension or ecological dimension. It will have psychological dimension. It will have cultural, economic, and political dimension, as well as technological dimension. And the same is true for your work function. It reflects all those different dimensions, and we will be working with those in this module. We will look now at the 7 forces of system organization in overview. Every system has substance or matter-energy information, MEI for short. For example, my body has matter, energy, it moves, and there's information in it. Likewise, if we look at the table, it has matter, also energy, and information embedded in it. So every system is composed of matter-energy information. In an organization, we call it resources. So an organization consists of human resources, material resources, knowledge resources, technological resources, etc. As we change the resources of a system, for example, the system changes. If we employ different persons, or if we replace technologies with the latest technologies, the system will change. So substance is an important force of organization. Then every system exists within an environment. If the environment changes, the system has to adapt in order to survive and thrive. So the interaction of the system and its environment and how the system manages environmental change and how it adapts to it is an important force of organization. Then every system has ethos. Ethos is the field of information, values and guidelines that determines the form and function of the system. If we use the DNA in the body as an analogy, the information embodied or embedded in the DNA drives the unfolding and the development of an organism. Likewise, the ethos of an organization, which is its organizational culture, its values, drive the unfolding of the organization. As the organization changes its ethos, the whole system will change. And we have observed in many organizations recently, in the last decade or so, a vast transformation in culture from industrial age thinking to a global, diversified, flexible, information-based organization culture. Then every system has aims. That is what the system wants to do and achieve. In an organizational context, we normally talk about the vision and the mission and the objectives and strategies, goals, etc. As we change the goals of an organization, the whole organization will change. Then every system has process. Process we define as the flow of matter energy in time and space. So as I observe my hand moving in time and space, I observe process. If a system has no process, it has no activity and it is dead. In an organizational context, what we typically look at when we look at the process perspective is that we have matter energy information input, then we are processing that input into our desired products or services, our matter energy information output. So the management of and the design of that flow of matter energy information is what process is about. Then every organization has structure. By structure we mean the matter energy information configuration, or put differently, the way we are arranging the things in time and space. So the structure of the room is how the different pieces of furniture are arranged. If we are looking at how the machines and workstations and persons are structured along a production line, how they are configured along a production line is what we refer to as the structure of the production line. And if we are changing that structure, then we will change the system. That is what we normally do in restructuring. Structure can also be an action pattern. For example, if you look at a pattern of an EEG, the regularity of the process flow that we observe is also what we call a structure. This is an action structure. Likewise, our organogram that depicts our organizational structure is a picture of how the interaction of the different parts of the organization flow regularly. How is decision making flowing? How is the functional flow between the different parts of the organization happening? That is depicted by the organizational structure. Then every system has governance. It sets its aims. That is what we normally do in planning. And then every system has regulation. It has regulatory criteria, for example, the norms and specifications according to which we need to perform or do our actions. There are frameworks of governance in an organization of what is and isn't allowed, legal frameworks, frameworks for how we do planning or how do we budget controls or whatever. And then we have governing activities, the planning, monitoring, evaluating, what we normally refer to as managing, and also leadership would be a governance action. If we look at the biomatrix and the systems within the biomatrix, then every system is organized by the 7 forces. Activity systems are determined by the 7 forces of organization, and entity systems are organized according to the 7 forces of organization. The 7 forces of system organization shape both activity systems and entity systems. However, there is a different starting point and a different emphasis for applying them in activity systems and in entity systems. In the case of an activity system, we are starting with the aim of the system and determine the process that is required to achieve that aim, and a governance emphasis is on regulation. So the system is regulated to achieve its aims. By comparison, the emphasis in the entity system is on structure. That is, how do the different activity systems of the entity interact with each other? So this is the organizational structure. And the ethos of the entity system, which acts as an attractor to hold the different activity systems and the entity system as a whole together. So ethos and structure are very important, and the emphasis on governance is that of coordinating the governance of the different activity systems. There's also a different emphasis of these 7 forces depending if I want to do interventions in a system that are of a strategic nature or that are of an operational nature. The strategic perspective emphasizes the ethos and aims of the system. That's true for both the activity and entity systems. It also emphasizes changes in the environment, because changes in the environment often enforce a change in ethos and a change in aims. And the strategic perspective also looks at the correct structure and the coordinating governance. In the case of operational perspective, we are looking at process in detail. How does the matter-energy information flow? How is that flow structured, which is the structure of the activity system or the process structure? And how is the system regulated? So the operational perspective is for creating the outcomes one wants to achieve, while the strategic perspective looks more at what should be the ideal outcomes that should be achieved.